This is Matthew McConaughey.
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson.
Michael Ian Black.
And you are listening to
Five Questions
with Dan
Schawbel.
Soledad, welcome to Five Questions.
Thanks for having me.
What did you learn from your parents that allowed you to persevere and make a name for yourself?
I think what I learned from my parents, who were both immigrants to this country, so I'm a first generation American, is sort of this kind of boring idea of putting your head down and kind of working through challenges often can be very successful. I think often immigrants suck up a lot. My parents moved to a community that wasn't very diverse. And I think it was often hard for them, but you would never know it. They never talked about it. They never reflected it to their kids. The one thing my mom would say was, you don't need to date anybody here when you go to college. It's a good thing. Nobody wants to go out with you, which I, as a teenager, did not think so. But like this idea of suck it up and just get through it, I think is a really valuable lesson to learn early on.
We all get frustrated from time to time, and it's not bad to complain, but at the end of the day, complaining is not going to solve the problems in life. As you know, from a work-life perspective, it's about problem solving. And jobs exist because of problem solving.
Yeah, you can complain and also continue to suck it up and keep going at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive.
Exactly. While many people make New Year's resolutions, only 9% actually keep them to the end of the year. So a lot of people get excited. They watch these, big broadcasts and Good Morning America Today show. And they're like, I got to make some resolutions, but it's easier to say or even write down those resolutions and much harder to act on them and to achieve them. What are some of your resolutions and how are you committed to seeing them through?
I make easily 30 resolutions a year. New Year's is my favorite holiday. My husband is in that 9% where he has a list for the last, we've been married 26 years. So he has a list from every single year of the resolutions he made and how and then he grades how he did in tracking them. So I'm not that. I think I do a pretty good job because my resolutions are kind of broad. I try to eat better. I try to get more exercise. And I put it in the middle step of how do you think about how to get there, right? It can't just be a version of wishful thinking. It has to have the element that's the act that makes the result happen, right? So I think I'm pretty good at structuring them. And, I often, resolutions this year for me, a financial resolution was to get organized around my money. In the past, it's just been about like literally make more money. I was paid $11,000 a year in my first TV job. But a lot of times you report on people who have these terrible, horrible tragedies happen. And their widows or widowers will talk about how like the idea that they didn't have to deal with digging through all the paperwork to figure it out. Like that was just a thing that was solved for them, really made me think about like, I'd like to get a little more organized about that. God forbid something bad happens and people need all my passwords, but more likely just so that, if you need to find something, you can find it on a shelf somewhere. And, that was a big part of the reason for working with Gene Chatsky on the show that we're doing, Everyday Wealth, was like, how do you get people to whatever they resolve? You want to buy a house? Okay. But you can't sit here and be like, oh, I want to buy a house, fingers crossed. It has to be. So what's step one? What's step two? What's step 99? There go buy your house. It's getting people along that path.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually every study I see on, financial wellness and just some of the pain points that people encountered over the past 2 years, especially, it's really money problems, health problems. A lot of that has to do with money, relationships. A lot of that has to do with money. So money becomes a pretty, big foundation for a lot of the issues that people have, not having enough, maybe even having too much. And I think it's great what you're doing because, the earlier, it is that people figure out how to manage that money, the better off they'll be. Like I always got frustrated why they didn't teach financial literacy in high school or college. Like, why are people having to somehow figure this out right now?
Yeah, on their own usually. And usually when it's a little bit too late, you've got a credit card and suddenly you realize like, oh, I understand how this works. I owe somebody a whole bunch of money. I don't always think it's money, the money problem. I think it's how we think about money. That's the problem, right? Like how we You don't communicate about it. You don't lay out your goals. I think about money very differently than Jean. Jean's an expert in money, but I think about money in terms of, here's a life I want to lead. My husband and I just sold our apartment in Manhattan, moved up to Harlem. So we lived in Chelsea for 20 years. And we were like, to me, it wasn't about money, but of course, if you want to buy an apartment and sell an apartment, money's involved. It was like, what do you want to be doing when you're 70? Like, who's around you? What events are you going to? And I was like, I want to be in a community. I want to spend my money with small business people. I want to host events that are going to help my community. Chelsea's not really the place for that. So we picked a different place. So for me, money is more about like, what does it look like? And I always try to get people off the dollars and cents of it and like talk about what your life should be. Because sometimes the real issue is that people have very different visions about the money, whether it's a lot, that they have to deal with or not enough that they have to deal with. It's really more about how they're thinking about it. That's the problem.
Well said. And aside from being a journalist and a documentarian, you're involved in other projects, like you just mentioned with Jean, that focus on empowering people using the right financial tools so that they can succeed. How did you overcome your own financial challenges, and what did you learn from that process that can help others?
Yeah, I think what you described as, nobody really being financially literate was a very good description of how I was. My parents were solidly middle class, and I had 5 brothers and sisters. So classic, we were never wanting for anything, but my mother would rather die than buy a pair of Jordache jeans. They're too tight anyway. No one needs to be wearing that, but also they're $78. So we're like, we were never going to get that kind of stuff growing up. And if I wanted to buy something, I had to pay for it myself. So on one hand, I was very good at understanding if I wanted money, and if I wanted something, I was going to have to work for it. I loved horses. I loved horseback riding. I paid for my own lessons from the time I was 13, from babysitting and mucking stalls, because it's something I love to do. My parents were very supportive, but they certainly weren't going to, riding is an expensive sport. They sure as heck weren't going to do that for one of their 6 kids. I think issues, though, were, as you said, I didn't really understand, what it meant to buy stuff on credit, like really. I wasn't super organized about what I was buying, what I was spending, where my money was coming from, how it was, what was I saving for? I got a lot better at it as when I started really, for a long time, my first job, I was making about $11,000 a year. That was in 1987. And once I moved into the $25,000 a year bracket, which was an official position from PA to news writer. So that was like an actual skilled job. That was enough money that I could pay rent. Like I had enough. I could pay rent. I could take cabs some places. I didn't have a car when I was in Boston, and I could have a little bit more of a life. And then it became more about, okay, I have enough money. I just need to manage it, versus I just never had enough money to do what I needed to do. So I learned some hard lessons, just messiness, and couldn't get stuff that I wanted to do, couldn't do the things that I wanted to do. And again, I think I really started thinking about like, what can money do for you? What do you want? How do you want to live? That to me was really probably a big breakthrough around finance, thinking about it that way, not dollars and cents, not, if I can make $1 million, I'll retire, I can make, and then, those things bump up anyway. But it was really, well, where do you want to live? And what do you want to be around? And, what sports do you want to do? And, where do you want to go on vacation? And, what are the values of your life, and how does money play into that? That was what was always interesting to me. And that's kind of what we've tried to bring to Everyday Wealth, again, pushing people on what's the big picture. And I think when you sit down and talk to financial, no more than I don't think you can solve these problems by yourself. I think you actually need an expert to stay on track with your resolutions. You need someone who's going to keep, it's kind of how I sail, and I'm a bad sailor. Like you keep having to tack back to where you were, or one day you'll look back and be like, holy crap, where's the dock? I'm completely lost. And I think having an advisor who constantly brings you back. Remember we're saving for college. Remember you said this is what you wanted to do. That kind of, financial advisors and wealth advisors, I think, are really helpful on that front.
Yeah. The way you're describing money right now is it's an enabler.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that you got growing up that I did as well, my first job, it was a service level job when I was 13 years old. And so if you can have a job when you're younger, you can really understand that money is not only an enabler, but you have to work for it. And it's not easy, especially in the service industry. And so by not only seeing your parents work hard, but actually working hard yourself, especially when you were younger, that really gives you a really good grasp on what money is and what it can do, and that it's not going to just fall from a tree.
And also that the big chunks of it are taken out for taxes and other stuff. I mean, there's a very funny episode of Friends where Rachel gets her pay stub. And she's like, who the heck is FICA? And why did he take all my money? A friend of mine used to write on that show. And I just remember thinking like, that was hysterical. Because I think all of us had that you're like, no, I remember my best paying job was almost $10 an hour when everybody was making $3.35 because I was a certified nurse's aide. So I had a real job. I was a professional nurse's aide. And I remember calculating like, okay, at $10, I think I'm going to clear, I get my check. I was like, it's about 3/4 of what I thought I was going to be. And my parents were like, oh yes, let's explain taxes to you. It's painful.
Yeah, part of your career, or most of your career, is really about shining the light on topics that you care about and, coming out with, documentaries and commentary and promoting tools and collaborations like you had just mentioned, to be able to help solve these issues and raise awareness for them. So some of the issues that you're tackling now is around education and gender equality. Why are these so important to you?
Yeah, I think because it's brutally unfair and there's a very clear record of facts about why things are why they are. I know we like to say like Black wealth. I don't know. It just seems like Black people have less money. You're like, okay, let's take a look back at history and understand how we got where we are. Let's talk about some of those things that are incredibly unjust. I mean, there was a great, someone on Twitter likes to post great Zillow ads. And one of them was for Mr. Levitt, I think William Levitt, who built Levittown in Long Island. And, was going on and on about his fabulous wealth and all the things, but William Levitt was very clear that Black people could not live in his communities, right? So as people in Levittown, many of my friends from Long Island lived in Levittown, their parents could buy a home, they could grow their wealth, those homes became more and more valuable. Well, a lot of people were blocked out of that, right? They couldn't get a home, and they were literally, he had actual notices written that said, only Caucasians can live here. Black people and other people of color can live here if they can work here, if they're in, servicing the houses, but they can't live here. So I like to kind of undergird this history and the facts around like, this is why we are where we are. It's not just happenstance. And so the same is true in gender equality. This, for a lot of issues, understanding the history gives you a lot of insight about kind of like what America has been like for lots of different people. And I also run with my husband a very small foundation. We send girls to school and helping them understand like, that's how it was. This is why. So then let's talk about why owning a house as maybe a very important asset is critical, and making sure that your credit score is good, and figuring out how to save money, and even figuring out what kind of job you need to have for the life you think you're going to be living. Those are very tactical strategies that I think often people don't think about, like live your passion. Well, no, if you're a person who has expensive tastes, make sure you're in a job that is both something you love doing and makes enough money that you can actually afford to live the life that you want to lead. So that's kind of why it matters to me. Injustice makes me so mad, which means sometimes I can be a dream killer. Like, the story of William Levitt is crazy and it's over the top. And I'm like, he's a racist. He was a terrible person. He died penniless, by the way. His whole investment eventually went belly up when he sold his company. So maybe there's some justice in that. But I think it's important for people to understand true history and how it plays out into what we see and live today.
Yeah, it's not only the storytelling of, the historical, references, but it's also the hard data too. And the combination of both, it's hard to go against that. But I also think that, just making money isn't enough. Like you're saying, you also have to manage the money and invest the money, because you see all these people who win the lottery and then they become broke again because, yes, there was luck there, but there wasn't the mindset or education or ability to know how to invest it to maintain it.
And also, in a lot of those cases, and when I worked on the Today Show, right, the number of times I sat on the couch with the person, so congratulations, this is amazing. Tell me how you're going to spend this money, right? The people who do it well actually tell no one. I had a friend who won the lottery once, $11 million. And it was kind of a mess in some ways for his family. But I think you're right. It's not just getting the money. It's like, what's the plan? And often you get the check before you have the plan in place. And it's about managing your resources. Again, it doesn't have to be you won the lottery, but for a lot of folks, sometimes in a decent sized family, you can be the only child who's really making enough money. You have to have conversations about, okay, so who's taking care of mom and dad? Where are they living? One of the reasons I was so interested in working on the show is, they were interviewing me to do the show. And I said, I would love to talk about a big failure that I had, which was when my parents passed away just a couple of years ago now. I had 5 brothers and sisters. We're all quite close, but we just managed it so badly. We didn't get onto my parents' accounts until they were in their 80s versus in their 70s. We didn't ever sit down and say, so you're in a 2-bedroom. How's this going to work in Manhattan? If let's say hypothetically you need round-the-clock care, what's the life you want to lead? Not at 75 when you're healthy, not even at 80 when you're in pretty good shape, but at 82 and 83 when you start to fall apart. We just never did that. My parents were like, nope, we got it. And we believed them like idiots. And they just didn't know how to deal with it. And now I look around and I think I tell so many of my friends to have that conversation at 70, not at 80. Get on those accounts early. Literally, where is a nurse's aide going to live? Right? Because in Manhattan, it's really challenging. We don't have, houses you can pop someone into the extra guest room next to the attic, So it was really a very messy thing. And I had mentioned to the folks when we were first talking, I just would like to, that's about money, right? That is, how are your resources going to help you live out the end of your life? And I know it freaks a lot of people out, but it's much harder to do it the other way. The way we did it was terrible. Much better to have that conversation early on. So, that's one of the things that I wanted to do too, really help people learn from the mistakes that me and my brothers and sisters made.
And what's your best piece of career advice?
Oh my gosh, I've had so many, but I think the biggest one is kind of how we started, which is people underestimate the value of putting your head down and just working hard, right? There's a whole bunch of advice around your brand and how to think about yourself, and really at the end of the day, I find I like to hire people who work hard, who turn around when they make a mistake and say, I screwed this up, how do I fix it? And who just show up every day, day after day after day, trying to get better and do a good job. I love that employee. So I think sometimes my advice is just put your head down and work really hard every day, every single day. That will get you very, very far. And I know it doesn't sound sexy, so I don't think people talk about it enough, but it's really good advice.
Well, if you say the word hustle, then it starts sounding sexy, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But hustle almost sounds like you're doing it for other people. You're not doing, I remember we were in, I think I was at MSNBC and there was breaking news. And I had one of the interns sit in front of me because my computer wasn't working and I was on the desk anchoring. And she would just print out updated stories over and over, and unbelievable, super, super, just amazing production assistant. And they were all, rotated through. So they lasted for about 9 or 10 months. And at the end, we hired her. I was like, that was amazing. And didn't say, hey, it's been 6 hours and I've been sitting here. She was like, as long as you're sitting in the anchor chair, I will be sitting here. She was unbelievable. And literally at the end of her shift, which was about 12 hours, I was like, would you like to work here full time? You're amazing. And that actually happens not infrequently, where people just show what they're made of. They work really hard and people turn around and say, wow, that was great. We want you to be part of our team. That, I think that happens more often than we talk about.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.